Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of Robostoph's Fireside Book Chat. Tonight we're going to be talking about Ernest Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea. For those of you who are unaware of what this show is about, it is simply a discussion series where we talk about some of my favorite books next to a cozy fire. This one's ripping. Hopefully it doesn't catch my beard oil on fire. Alrighty, not only we're going to summarize this book, we're also going to talk about some of its themes like perseverance as well as obsolescence. And I'm going to give a few pointers for high school students who have to tackle this book. Alright, first off, let's summarize this book here. We have an old man. His name is Santiago, a name I've always been partial to. Alright, that's enough of that. So anyway, Santiago, old timer, is a fisherman. And he's still kind of got like one last big ride in him, you know. And he's determined to catch a big fish after somewhat of a long dry spell. His protege sort of urges him not to go alone, but Santiago insists that this is something he has to do. So he goes out to sea to catch this big fish. And he gets one. And it's so big that it starts to pull him out to sea. And Santiago, being the experienced fisherman that he is, sort of lets this fish tire himself out. And lets the fish pull him out a couple days, a few nights, I feel, out into the open sea. And eventually he gets his kill. Right, and he takes this fish out and he sort of reels it into the boat a little bit, so it's hanging off the edge, and he's going to go back to shore with his prize. But along the way, these sharks come and they sort of pick apart his catch. And by the time he gets back to where he's headed, he has nothing to show for it. Santiago is pretty stubborn, makes a lot of mistakes, but also is highly experienced and has several triumphs as well. And despite kind of having the impression that this might be his like last big attempt to do something like this, it's sort of implied that he'll take his protege back out there one day and learn from the mistakes he made and try it again. All right, so there's a good chance that high schoolers are still reading this one as required reading. A few pointers for you. Don't read too deep into this one. Yeah, it has themes like perseverance and faith and all that stuff, and Google's going to tell you as much. But don't read too deeply into it. This story is successful in a very surface level kind of way. And if you do have to read this one, I actually recommend listening to the audiobook version. There's a version floating around on the tube, narrated by Charlton Heston. He is the lead actor for Planet of the Apes. And Soylent Green, and his narration is fantastic in my opinion, so be sure to check out that version in my opinion, because it is the definitive version and performance of this story. Alrighty, so part of the reason I read this story in the first place is I'm kind of a sucker for stories where an old guy's got to go back out there and give it like one last big effort, you know. Off the top of my head, you got like Rocky from Rocky 6, Briggs from Lethal Weapon. You got the Carl Terminator from Terminator Genesis, who says, old, not obsolete, right? And that feeling of being obsolete is very much ingratiated in this book here. And it's kind of a masculine story in that sense, right? Because I think part of the male experience is to prove yourself, and oftentimes men especially measure their worth by what they can provide. And in this case, Santiago is a fisherman. That's what he does. That's his whole life, right? That's his identity, is being a fisherman. And if you were to take that away from him, who is he? And I can think of lots of guys, myself included, that suffer from a bit of an identity crisis in that regard, where if you take away the things that I'm good at or the things that I define myself as, then who am I? Now, despite sort of the arc of the story, I would say that I would implore you as a man to rest on being a good person first, right? Don't try to define yourself by what you can do or what you can provide. First and foremost, let being a good person be the forefront of your identity. And that can be very difficult. It's actually very difficult, because that's not natural to us, right? That's actually kind of a foreign idea. But when it comes to the struggles of old men specifically, you are at a time in your life eventually where you're not as good as you once were. And you may have to find new creative ways to tackle the same old challenges that you always have without necessarily the physical merits that you've rested upon this entire time to get you there. And that's kind of what happens to Santiago, right? Where um, he's got to use his wits a little bit more than his strength to take this fish down. Um, and I think that's not just a male thing. That is a human thing where as your body ages and you become this whole other person, the challenge of everyday life, I'm not on fire, it's okay, is battling time, battling aging. And that can actually be an interesting story arc in and of itself, combating aging. In my personal opinion, the elderly are kind of the most openly discriminated against group of people, in the sense that most people in the younger generations don't value the experience and wisdom that elderly people bring to the table. I think part of the reason for this is oftentimes it can seem like, um, that the elderly are from a different place and time altogether, and that their experiences aren't valuable in this ever-changing world. But if there's one thing that reading specifically has taught me, it's that the human experience is somewhat timeless, right? If you were to read the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is a story that's over 5,000 years old, or even look at stories of the Bible, whatever your opinion on Christianity may be, if you look into the Bible a little bit, you find stories that are just as relevant for their time as they are to our time. Sure, you may have to bend some things into place a little bit here and there, but for the most part, humans haven't changed as much as we like to think that we have. So there's really a lot of value in listening to the experiences. On a more personal note, I have a person in my life, my dad, who actually went out in his 60s, came out of retirement, and lived off a dream of his where he served aboard the Paltergurtha in the Great Lakes in his 60s. A remarkable feat, and it's just that's the real life. My dad is the real life old man in the sea situation, and I would like to think that one day I too will have the privilege of getting old, and I hope that I'm not written off just because I've aged. If anything, that should earn you something, a little bit of street cred in a sense, where you've done your time, you've done your part. But that doesn't mean that you don't still have something to offer in some kind of way. And I'm sure that's a difficult part of the journey where the thing that you've been good at your whole life might not be the thing that you get to do when you're older. You might actually have to hang it up, maybe arthritis or something like that. But if my dad has taught me anything, it's that it's also not too late to go out and do something new. So whereas the guy from this story relies upon his skills and abilities and what he's learned his entire life to get him through this experience, there's an alternative path there where, my grandma taught, started painting later in life and was fantastic at it. And then that's a lot of people, right? Where you're not done yet, right? So I guess that's all I really have to say is that don't write off the old folks, man. They're up to good stuff. So here's to you old people. I really enjoyed this one. Be sure to check it out. Ernest Hemingway's The Old Man in the Sea.